poor nurse gave blood transfusion to the coma patient. He was the vampire prince waiting to awaken. The basement of Street Mercy Hospital smelled like rust and formaldehyde, a scent that had long ago stopped making Evangeline's stomach turn. 4 years of graveyard shifts as a trauma nurse had calcified her against such horrors. She'd held dying men's hands. She'd watched hope drain from eyes like water from a broken vessel. She'd learned that hospitals were cathedrals of a different sort, places where prayers went to die alongside the faithful. But nothing had prepared her for the sealed crypt beneath the East Wing sublevel. The explosion had been minor, a gas leak. The inspectors would later claim just enough to crack the foundation and expose what the original 1,887 blueprints had hidden. Structural engineers now swarmed the preliminary assessment, their flashlights cutting through darkness like surgical instruments. Evangeline wasn't supposed to be down here. Her shift had ended 3 hours ago. Yet she'd lingered in the break room, too restless for sleep, too haunted by the 15-year-old boy who'd flatlined on her watch, and she'd heard the sirens in the walls before anyone else. Curiosity is a sin, her grandmother had always whispered. The crypt was small, barely 10 feet across, carved directly into the bedrock beneath the hospital's foundation. Stone sarcophagi lined the walls like sleeping sentinels, their marble faces worn smooth by centuries. The air was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the October night. It was the cold of tombs, of preserved death, of something older than the hospital itself. And there against the far wall, on a stone sepulchre adorned with tarnished silver filigree, lay a man. Evangeline's breath caught. Her nurse's training screamed protocol. Call for assistance. Do not approach the deceased. Maintain a sterile perimeter. But her feet were already moving, drawn by something primal she couldn't name. A thread of compulsion, fine as spider silk, pulling her toward him. He wasn't in a coffin. He lay atop the stone like a prince on his deathbed, dressed in clothes that belonged to another era. A velvet coat, the color of dried blood. The fabric so decayed it might crumble to ash at a touch. His face was marble pale, beautiful in the way a cathedral is beautiful, full of sorrow and severity, and something too ancient for the modern world to comprehend. But it was his hands that made her stop. They were graceful, aristocratic, the nails grown long and curved like claws. And on his wrist, barely visible beneath the frayed sleeve, was a mark, not a tattoo, but something burned into the flesh, a symbol that looked like twisted thorns wrapping around a broken crown. "Dear God," she whispered. That was when his eyes opened. They were silver, not gray, not pale blue, but actually silver, like ancient mirrors reflecting light that didn't exist. For a moment, Evangeline was certain she was hallucinating. Sleep deprivation, grief exhaustion from the boy's death, some psychotic break finally arriving after years of suppressed trauma. But then he exhaled, a sound like wind through ruins, and she felt the ancient cold of him, the terrible presence of something that predated hospitals and cities, and perhaps Christianity itself. "No," he said. His voice was papery, fractured, a sound emerging from a throat that hadn't spoken in decades. "No, not her, not—" His hand moved, not toward her, away, as if she were fire and he were trying not to burn. The movement was weak, broken. Whatever he was dying, not the way mortals died, but in some other manner, a slow dissolution that came from within. "You're hurt," Evangeline heard herself say. Her voice sounded very far away, belonging to someone braver than she was. Someone foolish. "I'm a nurse. I can run." He said it with such force that she actually stepped backward. His silver eyes were wide now, horrified, fixed on her with an intensity that suggested he could see straight through her skin, past bone and blood to the marrow of her soul. "You must run from this place. From me. There is no redemption in what I am, and your pity is a greater curse than—" He coughed. Blood, ancient and dark, leaked from the corner of his mouth. Not red blood, black as sin. Evangeline's medical instincts warred with something else, a strange, singing awareness that made her skin prickle with electricity. Every cell in her body was screaming at her to obey him, to run up the stairs and back into the fluorescent normalcy of the hospital above, to return to her small apartment, to her small life, to the comfortable small death of mediocrity that she'd accepted at age 19. Instead, she took another step forward. "What are you?" she whispered. "Damned," he said simply. The silver eyes closed. "Lost. I have been asleep for so long, waiting for the sun to burn away the stain of my sins, but it seems the world has evolved new ways to encase me. Tombs of steel and plastic instead of stone. And now," his eyes opened again, fixing on her with desperate intensity. "Now you have come, and I remember why I bargained away my soul." "I don't understand," Evangeline said. "You will," he breathed. "Oh, beloved, you will, and God help us both." He reached for her then, that graceful, terrible hand. His fingers were ice, and not the honest cold of the crypt, but something that burned like frostbite, something that seemed to drain the warmth from the universe itself. She saw why he'd pulled back before. There was warning in his eyes, ancient and desperate. "This will hurt. This will change you. This will bind you to an eternity of nightmares." But Evangeline was already lifting her hand to meet his. The moment their skin connected, the world inverted. She saw centuries not as a witness but as an experiencer, memories that weren't hers, flooding her consciousness like blood into new tissue. Stone cathedral halls under starlight, a woman's face, beloved and betrayed, hands, so many hands drenched in blood that glowed black in the darkness. A dark covenant, a ritual of damnation, a prince's crown cracking as the curse took root. I loved her. A voice that was his but wasn't older, deeper, echoing through time itself, and my love became her damnation. I have spent centuries praying for another chance, for one soul pure enough to bind to, for a love that would not lead to ruin. She wanted to pull away. She couldn't. His touch was gravity, and she was falling into him, into the weight of centuries, into... The basement lights flickered and came back on. "Miss Chen," a security officer's voice, shouting from the stairs. "Step away from that, is that a body?" Evangeline jerked back as if burned. The contact broke. The flood of memories ceased, though the echo of them remained, singing in her bones. She turned to see the security officer's flashlight beam cutting through the crypt, illuminating her, then the figure on the stone sarcophagus. When the light hit him, she heard the officer gasp, because the creature was already fading, as if the mere touch of electric light was dissolving him, turning him transparent. His silver eyes found hers one last time, and in them she saw centuries of longing, of waiting, of a love so profound and so poisoned that it had curdled into this, a curse that bound him to darkness, to stone, to the slow death of immortality. "Come back," he said. "Just for her, just that. Miss Chen, step away." The officer barked, but as Evangeline turned toward safety, toward the rational world of fluorescent lights and protocol, she felt it. A thread of connection, fine as spider silk, binding itself around her heart. A mark that no scanner could detect, no doctor could diagnose. He had marked her, and now, whether she willed it or not, she was bound to return to the darkness. The crypt sealed itself that night. The engineers couldn't explain it. The crack simply stopped spreading, the stone wall somehow repairing itself with what seemed like impossible speed. The basement was declared structurally sound. The inspection was filed away in triplicate. Evangeline returned to her apartment and couldn't sleep. She lay in her small bed, her small life, and felt the mark burning in her chest like a second heart. It sang to her with a voice that sounded like sorrow, like eternity, like a fallen prince waiting in darkness for a redemption he didn't deserve. She told herself she would never go back. By dawn, she was already calling in sick for her night shift, already searching the hospital's archives for information about a crypt from 1887, already feeling the pull drawing her back into the darkness. And beneath the hospital, in stone and shadow, she felt him awaken to hope, terrible, dangerous, beautiful hope, for the first time in 300 years. 3 days without sleep transformed the world into something watercolor and unreal. Evangeline moved through her apartment like a ghost haunting her own life. A cup of tea forgotten on the kitchen counter, emails unread, her phone dark and silent on the nightstand. None of it mattered. The only thing that existed was the burning in her chest and the voice that called to her from beneath the earth. "Come back, come back, come back." Not words, exactly. More like a frequency she could feel in her bones, a vibration that resonated through her cells with the persistence of a heartbeat, his heartbeat. Their heart beat now, though she still couldn't fully comprehend what had happened in that crypt, what he was, what she was becoming. Why touching his hand had felt like touching the core of the world itself. The mark had spread. She'd discovered that on the first day, when she'd pulled up her sleeve to wash her hands and found the symbol twisted thorns wrapping a broken crown now visible on her inner wrist, written in her own skin like a birthmark she'd somehow never noticed before. When she touched it, she felt him. Exhaustion, hunger, an ache so profound it made her want to weep. She'd called in sick again. And again. Her supervisor had left 3 voicemails. Concerned, professional, borderline threatening. Evangeline deleted them all. On the 4th morning, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back was hollow-eyed, her brown skin gone ashen, her black hair limp and dull. She looked, she thought distantly, like someone dying of thirst while swimming in the ocean, desperate, consumed, marked. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Evangeline, your hospital called. Are you well? Call me." She silenced the phone. Instead, she dressed. Black jeans, a dark sweater, boots with heavy soles that made no sound on her apartment's worn hardwood floors. She moved like someone in a trance, guided by instinct rather than conscious thought. Her hands packed nothing, no phone, no ID, no logical precautions. What good were such things against the force that was pulling her toward the hospital at 3 a.m? The October night was cold enough to sting. Leaves scattered across the sidewalk like ancient parchment, and the moon hung overhead, not quite full, but close enough that its light seemed almost silver. His silver. She could feel him beneath the city now, a warmth in the earth, a presence that grew stronger with every step forward. Street Mercy Hospital rose before her like a tombstone, its Gothic architecture suddenly obvious to her, as if she'd never truly seen it before. Of course it was Gothic. Of course the crypt had been there, waiting. Of course she'd been drawn to work here 4 years ago, moving into this city for no reason she could articulate beyond a vague sense of rightness, of destiny. The emergency room was still bright, still frenetic, but she skirted it easily. She knew the basement entrance codes 4 years of graveyard shifts had taught her the hospital's secrets, the service corridors where maintenance wandered and security rarely patrolled. Her keycard worked. The elevator opened, and down into the cool earth she went. The crypt door was open. Not literally, it was still sealed, still repaired, still the ordinary basement wall that the engineers had declared sound. But when she pressed her palm against it, she felt it shift. He had preserved a passage just wide enough, just hidden enough. The wall was warm beneath her hand, almost alive. She stepped through. The darkness on the other side was absolute. The kind of darkness that predated electricity, predated fire, predated human sight itself. But she wasn't afraid. The mark on her wrist burned like a beacon, and she followed its light as if it were the only thing that mattered. And then her eyes adjusted, and she saw him. He wasn't lying down anymore. He knelt in the center of the crypt, his velvet coat gone, his pale skin almost luminescent in the darkness. The mark she'd seen on his wrist covered him. She understood now that it wasn't a single symbol but an entire language of marks. A scripture written in thorns and broken crowns that covered his torso, his arms, his throat. A map of his damnation. When he saw her, he made a sound, not quite a word, not quite a cry, something ancient and raw, like a gate opening that had been sealed for centuries. "Evangeline," he said. He knew her name. Of course he did. He'd tasted her memories when they touched, the way she'd tasted his. "You came back." "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "You did." His voice was stronger now, less papery, less broken. The crypt was feeding him somehow, or perhaps she was. Perhaps that was what the mark meant. "You could have stayed in your world. You could have convinced yourself that I was a hallucination, a symptom of stress. You could have been happy in your small life." "Could I?" She took a step toward him. Another. The mark on her wrist pulsed in rhythm with something that wasn't quite her heartbeat. "I've spent 4 years unhappy in my small life, and I didn't know it until I met you. I didn't know there was supposed to be more." He rose to his feet. It seemed to cost him effort, as if gravity pressed harder against him than it did against normal men. When he stood at full height, she understood that he'd been tall once, powerful. But the centuries had bent him slightly, carved him down like stone worn smooth by eons. Yet when his silver eyes fixed on her, she saw the prince he'd been. The one who'd loved a woman so completely that he'd damned himself rather than live without her. "What's your name?" she asked. "Your real name, before the curse." "Cassius," he said. It sounded like a sigh, like a prayer, like the sound of a bell rung in a long empty cathedral. "I was Prince Cassius of the House of Ashmark, and I made a blood covenant with entities older than God to bind myself to eternal darkness. I did it for love, and I would do it again, even knowing that my love destroyed the woman I meant to save." He didn't move toward her, though she could feel the hunger in him, not the crude hunger of a predator for prey, but something deeper, more spiritual, a hunger for connection, for absolution, for someone to see him and not turn away. "You said you'd been waiting for someone," Evangeline said. The mark burned brighter. "Someone pure enough to bind to." "Was that are you?" "No." His denial was sharp, almost violent. "I am lying to myself if I think you could be redeemed by binding to me. My touch brings death, Evangeline. Not quick death, not merciful death, but a slow dissolution of the soul. Everyone who has loved me has suffered for it. My wife, my children, the servants who pledged themselves to me, all of them turned to ash beneath my curse. And you who have already marked yourself with my brand, you will suffer the same fate if you stay." She took another step forward. "You're dying," she said. It wasn't a question. She could feel it through the mark, the slow dissolution he'd been enduring, the centuries of agony and isolation. Without someone to bind to, you're dissolving. That's why you were dormant in that crypt. You were trying to sleep yourself to death, to finally end it. "Yes, but I can touch you," Evangeline said. "I'm not burning. I'm not dying." "Why?" Cassius was silent for a long moment. Then, "Because you were meant for this. Because somewhere in your bloodline, there is a thread of my own bloodline. A child, perhaps, or a great-great-grandchild. I lost count of my bastards after the first 2 centuries. The curse was written in my blood, and your blood carries an echo of it. You are immune. More than that, you are a key. You unlock me." She lifted her wrist, showing him the mark. "And this? That is a soul binding. The first stage of a covenant older than Christianity itself. It marks you as mine and me as yours. If you walk away now, if you never touch me again, the mark will fade within a fortnight, and you'll return to your small, unhappy life." He paused. "But if you let this continue, if you lower your wrist and take my hand voluntarily, then the binding completes. You will become like me, not human, not quite immortal, not yet, but something in between. A consort, a partner in damnation." Evangeline looked at her wrist. At the mark. At Cassius, with his silver eyes and his centuries of sorrow carved into his skin. Then she lowered her wrist. She saw him move, not running, but drifting like smoke across the crypt. His hand was trembling when it reached for hers. Cold again. So cold that it felt hot, that it felt like her entire body was made of glass about to shatter. But when their fingers intertwined, there was no shattering. There was completion. The mark exploded across her skin like wildfire, spreading from her wrist to her arm, spiraling around her shoulder, blooming across her chest and back in a language of thorns and broken crowns that matched his own. She gasped as the memories came again, but this time, deeper, older, more intimate. She saw his face centuries ago, unmarred by sorrow. She felt the moment he'd made the covenant, the terrible joy of it, the knowledge that he was choosing damnation for love. And he saw her not just her memories, but her essence, the shape of her soul, the reason she'd been born in this city at this time, drawn to this hospital, called to this crypt. She was his answer, his redemption, his final, beautiful curse. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," Cassius said. His cold hand tightened around hers, and she felt something shift in the space between them, a bond settling into place, a lock clicking, a covenant sealing. "But you're not alone anymore. Neither of us is." Above them, in the hospital above, alarms began to sound. Somewhere in the building, machines flatlined. Monitors screamed. The mark on Evangeline's skin, glowed faintly, and she understood. She was beginning to change. Her death was starting, slow and inevitable, but not alone, never alone again. In the darkness of the crypt, Cassius pulled her close, and for the first time in 300 years, a prince of darkness held something that felt like hope. The hospital discharge papers were a fiction, signed by a doctor who seemed oddly confused about her condition. Evangeline read them twice, understanding none of it. Viral infection, unusual blood work, recommend bed rest. Follow-up appointment optional. She knew the truth. Her transformation had begun. Over the next week, everything changed. Her skin grew paler, not from sickness but from some fundamental shift in her chemistry. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her breath becoming less necessary. The mark on her skin had faded to near invisibility, but she could still feel it, a permanent tattoo written in her very cells, connecting her to Cassius with threads of binding that grew stronger each day. The hunger was hardest. Not hunger for food, though that had vanished. She'd eaten nothing since the first touch in the crypt, and her body had seemed to purr with satisfaction. No, this was a different hunger, a need to be near him, to feel his presence, to hear his voice speaking in that ancient, melancholic tone. The mark sang constantly, a low vibration that she learned to read like music. When he suffered, it discoordinated. When he felt contentment, it rang like cathedral bells. By the end of the week, she understood that remaining in her apartment was impossible. Cassius had somehow arranged everything. A key appeared under her doormat, ornate silver, older than the hospital itself. A note accompanied it, written in handwriting that looked like it had been practiced across centuries. The Ashmark House. You'll know it when you see it. Come at dusk. We cannot stay in the crypt forever. The hospital's mortality interferes with what we're becoming. See, the house was a Victorian mansion on the city's oldest street, tucked between two modern office buildings like a relic that refused to be demolished. When Evangeline first saw it, she understood immediately what he'd meant about knowing it. The architecture was impossible. No rational city planner would have approved its construction. And yet there it stood, 3 stories of Gothic elegance, all black stone and silver filigree, with windows that looked out at the world like watchful eyes. The key turned easily in the lock. The door opened into darkness. She stepped through. The interior was candlelit, dozens of candles, perhaps hundreds, burning without any visible source of ignition. The light was golden and alive, making the shadows dance and flicker. The air smelled of old books and rose petals, and something ancient and indefinably him. "Welcome home," Cassius said. He stood at the far end of what had once been a grand parlor, backlit by candlelight so that his silhouette seemed to blur into the shadows themselves. He was dressed differently now, not in the decayed velvet of the crypt, but in modern clothes. Dark trousers, a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing the marks that spiraled down his arms. He looked almost human. Almost, "How?" Evangeline whispered. "I've owned this house for longer than I care to admit," Cassius said. "I lived here once, before I went to the crypt, before I decided that isolation was the only penance suitable for my sins." He extended his hand. "Come. There are things you need to understand about what you're becoming." She crossed the room toward him. It felt like crossing time itself, bridging the gap between her old world and this new, impossible reality. When his hand closed around hers, the mark on her wrist burned with such intensity that she gasped. "The mark will continue to change you," he said. "Over the next month, you'll sleep most of the time. Your body is rewriting itself at a cellular level. Your heart will slow. Your breathing will shallow. You may experience what feels like death multiple times. This is normal." "What am I becoming?" she asked. "A consort," he said simply. "Neither human nor vampire, something in between. You'll retain your humanity longer than my kind does. You'll maintain your heartbeat, your ability to eat human food if you choose, your ability to walk in daylight, though it will cause you pain until you adjust." He led her up a grand staircase, past portraits whose eyes seemed to follow their movement. "You'll gain speed, strength, extended lifespan. You'll be bound to me through the mark, able to feel my emotions, sense my location, draw strength from our connection, and in return, I gain my life back. The curse begins to reverse." "Why?" Evangeline asked. Why would you want me to suffer this? Because I'm selfish, Cassius said without a trace of irony. Because I've endured 300 years of isolation, and I cannot bear another day alone. Because you came back to the crypt when you could have walked away. And because... He paused at a door at the end of the hallway. Because the moment your hand touched mine, I knew that the universe had given me a second chance, and I will take it. Consequences be damned. He opened the door. Beyond lay a bedroom that seemed to exist outside of normal space. The walls were painted, the color of twilight, and the ceiling was a perfect rendering of the night sky. Stars glowing with their own light. The bed was enormous, draped in silver silk that shimmered like water. It smelled of him that scent of ancient stone and candle wax and something like wine left to age for centuries. You'll sleep here, Cassius said. I'll sleep in the room next door. Once your transformation completes, we'll... He stopped, his silver eyes distant. We'll figure out what happens next. Evangeline moved to the window. Outside, the city was darkening true dusk, that liminal moment between day and night. The streetlights were beginning to flicker on, creating a city of gold and shadow. She could see people moving below, going about their small, happy lives, unaware that impossible things existed in the spaces between their reality and the night. I miss my mother, she said suddenly. She'll be worried. She's been calling and I haven't answered. I know, Cassius said softly. There are ways to contact her without revealing what you are. We can arrange for medical staff to confirm that you're recovering, that you need rest, that you'll be unavailable for some time. She'll accept this. Mothers always do. Will I ever see her again? Evangeline turned to face him. Will I ever be able to touch her without... You won't hurt her, Cassius interrupted. The curse is specific. It only manifests with those we've sworn binding oaths to. Your mother is safe from your touch, as is anyone you don't formally covenant with. He paused. Though I suspect, in time, you may choose to covenant with at least one more. The consort's loneliness is nearly as profound as the vampire's. Two of us, bound together in the darkness, we need something to remind us that the world still exists, that there are others like us. Evangeline felt exhaustion wash over her, not the normal tiredness of a human body depleted of rest, but something deeper, the weight of transformation, of cells rewriting, of one life ending and another beginning. I need to sleep, she whispered. Yes, Cassius said. Sleep now. When you wake. He didn't finish. But as she moved toward the bed and sank into its silver softness, she felt his hand brush her hair, gentle and almost reverent. Through the mark, she felt his joy, his terror, his desperate gratitude. When sleep came, it came like drowning, deep and absolute and necessary. And in her dreams, she walked through centuries of memories that weren't hers. Stone cathedrals under stars, beloved faces, moments of terrible joy and profound sorrow, 300 years of waiting for this single moment. She dreamed of darkness, and it felt like coming home. She woke to pain, not the mundane pain of a mortal wound, but something that seemed to originate from her very marrow, a hunger so vast and profound that it felt like her skeleton was trying to claw its way out of her skin. Evangeline gasped, and the sound came out as something between a human cry and an animal shriek. She was burning from the inside. The bedroom was dark, or perhaps it was her vision that had changed. She could see every thread in the silver bedding, every dust mote in the air, could hear the heartbeat of the house itself, the ancient thrum of its foundations. And beneath it all, a stronger heartbeat, closer, in the room beyond the wall. Cassius. The mark on her wrist pulsed in rhythm with his presence, and she understood what her body was demanding. Blood. Not food, not sustenance, but him. The covenant was incomplete. The binding needed to be sealed with more than touch. She pulled herself from the bed, swaying as unfamiliar strength and weakness warred in her body. The mirror on the wall reflected a stranger. Her face was sharper now. All her softness refined away into something angular and beautiful and not quite human. Her eyes were different too, still brown, but with flecks of silver threading through the irises, like Cassius's mark was bleeding through into her very gaze. The door between bedrooms was locked. For a moment, she actually considered breaking it down. The impulse was there, raw and visceral, but she forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember that she was still human enough to exercise control. Instead, she knocked. Cassius opened it almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting on the other side. He took one look at her face and understood. His silver eyes widened, and she heard his breathing quicken, the only visible sign of the hunger that must be warring within him. "How long?" she managed to ask. 12 hours, he said. "Your body is rewriting faster than I anticipated. The mark wants completion." He stepped backward, creating distance. "Evangeline, you need to understand what you're asking for. Blood bonding is not casual. When a consort takes the blood of their bound vampire, when a vampire drinks from their consort, it creates a circuit. We become truly one, not metaphorically. At the cellular level, our magic braids together. There's no returning from that." "I know," she whispered, and she did know the mark had shown her. She'd learned it in her dreams, in the memories Cassius had shared. A blood bonding was forever. It would tie her to him across centuries, across death itself. She took a step forward. "Evangeline, I'm not asking you to give me a choice," she said. "I'm telling you what's happening. My body is demanding this. The Covenant is demanding this. The universe is demanding this." She could smell him now, the scent of his blood beneath his skin, ancient and powerful and calling to her like a siren song. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like memory, like a language she'd always known but had never spoken. Cassius reached out and pulled her into the bedroom beyond. This room was different from hers, less a sleeping chamber and more a private sanctuary. The walls were lined with books, thousands of them, centuries of knowledge and sorrow bound into leather and paper. The bed here was dark, masculine, and she understood that this was where he spent his nights, reading and remembering and waiting for oblivion that never came. "If we do this," he said, "if you take my blood and I take yours, you'll know everything. Every memory, every moment of pleasure and agony. You'll feel the weight of 300 years. It will break you." "I'm already breaking," Evangeline said. "The hunger is breaking me. The mark is breaking me. At least if I break in your arms, it will mean something." He kissed her then, and it wasn't gentle. His mouth was cold, and his lips tasted of wine and darkness, and something like cinnamon old spices from old lands. When his tongue touched hers, she felt the mark ignite across her entire body, every thread of the binding lighting up like fire. His hands tangled in her hair, and she realized he was shaking, that 300 years of isolation had taught him to be terrified of this moment even though he'd prayed for it. She pulled away just enough to look at his face. His silver eyes were reflecting the candlelight now, gleaming like liquid mercury. His fangs had descended fully, and she saw them clearly, elegant and terrible and utterly, impossibly perfect. "Yes," she whispered. "Now." He drew back, and for a moment, she thought he might refuse. The struggle played across his ancient face, duty versus desire, fear versus hope. Then he tilted his head, baring his throat to her. The sight of his vulnerable neck made something in her awaken, something that had always been there, sleeping in her blood, waiting for permission to emerge. She leaned forward, drawn by instinct rather than knowledge, and let her teeth find the joining of his throat and shoulder. When she bit him, she expected resistance. Instead, his skin gave way like silk, and the taste of his blood flooded her mouth. It was nothing like she'd imagined. His blood wasn't just taste, it was experience. It was sensation. It was 3 centuries poured into her body in a single moment. She saw the cathedral where he'd been born, saw the woman he'd loved, felt the moment he'd made the covenant, experienced the crushing weight of centuries of solitude. She drank deeper, and with each pulse of blood came another memory. Kingdoms rising and falling, religions transforming, the world outside changing while he remained fixed, unchanging, cursed. And she felt his joy, because she was there, and she was taking him in, accepting him, absorbing the weight of him without breaking. Or perhaps she was breaking, and he was there to catch her as she fell. His fangs found her throat, and she gasped as his bite mirrored hers. His blood and hers mingled now, not metaphorically but literally, mixing in her mouth, in her veins, binding them at the most fundamental level. She felt him drinking her, not just blood but something deeper, her essence, her memories, her soul itself. The world became nothing but this. The dark cathedral of his body, the sweet agony of the bite, the sensation of becoming one with something ancient and magnificent, and entirely unhuman. When they finally separated, Evangeline collapsed against him. They fell together onto the dark bed, their bodies still shaking, still resonating with the energy of the bonding. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, feel her own heartbeat matching his, feel the way their very atoms had begun to orbit each other, like planets around a shared sun. "I can feel you," she whispered. "I know," Cassius said. His voice was different now, stronger, less brittle, as if the blood exchange had restored something essential in him. "And I feel you. Your humanity, your warmth. It's like holding the sun after 300 years of darkness." She turned in his arms to face him, and even in the dimness, she could see the change in him. The marks on his skin were glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. His silver eyes were brighter, clearer, holding light they hadn't contained before. He looked less like a ghost, and more like a man dangerous still, cursed still, but alive in a way he hadn't been in centuries. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you rest," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Your body will integrate the blood, complete the bonding. You'll sleep, and when you wake, you'll be fully consort. Neither human nor vampire, but something entirely new." She nodded against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Through the mark, she could feel his contentment, his gratitude, but also something deeper, a current of fear that ran beneath the joy. She understood, through the memories he'd shared, why he was afraid. Every person he'd loved had suffered for it. Every covenant he'd made had curdled into tragedy. "I won't die," she said, as if speaking it aloud could make it true. "I can feel it through the bond. I'm not dying. I'm being reborn." "Perhaps," Cassius said quietly. "Or perhaps we're both dying and being reborn together. Perhaps that's what love always is, at its deepest level. A mutual annihilation followed by resurrection." Sleep came quickly after that, but it was different from the sleep of before. This was the sleep of transformation completed, of a covenant sealed in blood and shadow. In her dreams, Evangeline walked through Cassius's memories, as if they were rooms in an infinite mansion. She saw the man he'd been proud, passionate, capable of terrible love. She saw the curse take root, spreading like black vines through his being. She saw the centuries of isolation, the slow dissolution of hope, and she saw himself reflected back through his eyes. The woman who'd finally broken the spell. The one who was supposed to be his redemption. When she woke, it was to darkness that didn't feel like darkness anymore. Her eyes adjusted instantly to the gloom of the bedroom, and she could see everything. The books on the shelves, the dust motes dancing in the air, the faint shimmer of magic that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Cassius was standing at the window, looking out at the pre-dawn city. She rose without sound, her movements were fluid now, economical, like water finding its level. The mark on her wrist had become a permanent part of her skin, no longer burning but singing with quiet contentment. When she moved to stand beside him, he took her hand without looking at her. "Your mother called the hospital 6 times, he said quietly. "I arranged for them to tell her that you're in stable condition, that you've suffered a rare viral infection but are expected to make a full recovery, that you're sleeping and resting." She seemed satisfied with this explanation. "And after, we decide. You can visit her, if you wish. The curse won't activate with family, only with those you've covenanted with. But you'll need to explain your absence, your changed appearance, your sudden distance." He finally looked at her. "You'll need to begin building a lie, Evangeline. This is the price of what we are. We cannot exist in the daylight of the world. We can only haunt its margins." She felt the weight of that, the isolation, the necessary deception, the eternal separation from everything she'd known. But through the bond, she also felt his determination to make it bearable. He'd endured 300 years. He would teach her how to endure as well. The Victorian mansion revealed its secrets slowly, like a woman gradually lowering her veil. Over the next week, as Evangeline's transformation settled into her new reality, Cassius began to give her the history of both of them. They spent their nights in the library, that room that seemed to contain the entire weight of centuries in leather and paper, and he read to her from journals and ancient texts, each one illuminating another facet of what they were, what they'd become. I need to tell you about the woman, Cassius said one night, 3 weeks after the blood bonding. They were sitting in high-backed chairs positioned near the window, watching the city's lights flicker and dance below them. About why I damned myself, and why your existence matters beyond the simple fact of my survival. Evangeline felt a flutter of apprehension through the bond. Jealousy? No, she understood, through their shared connection, that what he'd felt for that long-dead woman was ancient, fossilized, transformed by time into something that resembled love more in memory than in actuality. Tell me, she said. Cassius rose and moved to the shelves, pulling down a journal bound in faded green leather. The pages within were covered in handwriting that became more erratic as the book progressed, the careful script deteriorating into desperate scrawls. Her name was Mariana, he began. I was 25 when I met her, young, arrogant, convinced that my title and wealth could purchase anything, including love. She was the daughter of a merchant's widow, beautiful but poor, and she caught my attention at a masquerade ball in Venice. I decided I would have her. He opened the journal to a page marked by a ribbon, the color of dried blood. Here's the first entry. Her name is Mariana. She laughed at my jokes today. I have never been laughed at before, only deferred to. I am ruined. You were young, Evangeline said softly. You were human. Yes, Cassius continued, his silver eyes distant. And I was selfish. I pursued her relentlessly, and because I had wealth and status and a handsome face, she eventually surrendered to my advances. We married within a year. I thought I was happy. I thought I had transcended the petty concerns of mortality. He turned pages, and Evangeline saw sketches within the margins, a woman's face, beautiful and lively, rendered again and again in charcoal and ink. Mariana. His lost love, the curse, Cassius said, came to me on the night of our first child's birth. I was drunk on celebration, arrogant in the way of young men who have everything they believe they desire. There was a woman in the town, a seer, a witch, someone who'd offered me a bargain years before, and I'd refused her. That night, she came to the hospital where Mariana lay recovering, and she offered me the covenant again. Immortality, power, eternal life with my beloved. What did you do? Evangeline asked, though she already knew the answer. She could feel the shape of it through the bond, the weight of that ancient choice. I accepted, Cassius said heavily. I performed the ritual. I cut my wrist and drew a circle in my own blood around the bed where Mariana slept, believing that she would be protected by my dark covenant, that she would live forever at my side. I thought I was saving her. He closed the journal. Instead, the moment the ritual completed, she began to change. Not into a vampire, I lacked the power to transform others then, and the witch had been deliberately vague about the consequences of covenant. No, Mariana began to age. Centuries of aging compressed into a single night. I watched as the woman I loved was consumed by time itself. By dawn, there was nothing left but dust. Evangeline felt the echo of that agony through the bond, a scream that had lasted 300 years, muffled but never quite silenced. Our child, Cassius continued, survived. She was 3 days old, and she carried enough of my blood, enough of the covenant's protection, to resist the curse. But she aged normally, lived a normal life, and eventually died of natural causes. Her descendants have continued through the years, diluted bloodlines scattered across the world, until you. He turned to face her fully. The witch told me, during those final moments before the covenant locked into place, that I would be given one chance at redemption. One soul in the distant future would share my bloodline and be immune to my curse. With her, I could remake what I'd destroyed. I could save what I'd damned. That soul is you, Evangeline. She processed this slowly, understanding not just his words but the weight of expectation they carried. And what if I'm not what you're hoping for? She asked quietly. What if I fail you the way? You won't, Cassius said, and through the bond she felt the absolute certainty of it. The witch's prophecy was specific. She will choose you freely. She will take your blood willingly. She will bind herself to you knowing the cost. And in doing so, she will break the cycle. You've already fulfilled the first 2 conditions. The third is simply time. Tell me about your bloodline, Evangeline said. Tell me about my family. Over the following nights, he did. He revealed how his daughter had married a merchant from England, how her great-great-grandchildren had immigrated to America, how the bloodline had scattered and intermarried and divided across generations until it produced her, Evangeline Chen, granddaughter of a Chinese immigrant and a second-generation American, carrying just enough of the ancient curse's immunity to survive the blood bonding. He showed her the journals of the intervening years he'd kept watch over his descendants, scattered across the globe, waiting for the one who would be marked by fate. Her grandmother had been an artist, her grandfather a musician. Her mother was a healer in her own way, a therapist who mended broken minds. And Evangeline herself had been drawn to trauma nursing, to standing vigil for the dying, drawn by ancestral memory to be present at the moment of greatest suffering. "You were always meant to find me," Cassius said, and it wasn't arrogance in his voice, only weary certainty. "The universe has been orchestrating this for 300 years. "Then I have no free will," Evangeline said. "I'm just the fulfillment of a prophecy. Is any of us free from our nature?" Cassius countered. "You chose to return to the crypt. You chose to accept the mark. You chose to take my blood. The prophecy only opened the door. You walked through it yourself." That night, Evangeline called her mother for the first time since her transformation. Her mother answered on the second ring, her voice thick with worried joy. "Evangeline, the hospital said you were recovering, but I've been so frightened. Where are you? When can I see you?" "Soon, Ma," Evangeline heard herself say. "I need to explain something, and I need you to promise not to hang up." There was a pause. Then, "I promise. I'm safe," Evangeline said. "I'm healthy. I'm living with someone I love. But I can't come home right now. I need time to adjust to some changes in my life. Medical changes that are permanent." She felt Cassius's presence in the room, his support through the bond, giving her courage. "What kind of changes?" her mother asked, and her voice had taken on that practiced therapist's tone, calm, non-judgmental, infinitely patient. "I can't tell you," Evangeline said. "Not yet, but I need you to trust me, to trust that I'm not in danger, that I'm not sick, that I've found something that makes my life finally feel like it has meaning." There was a long silence. "Is this person treating you well?" her mother finally asked. "Yes," Evangeline said, and through the bond, she felt Cassius's gratitude. "Better than well. He's showing me things about the world, about myself, that I never would have discovered otherwise." "Then I trust you," her mother said. "But Evangeline, you call me. You let me know you're alive, regularly." "I will," Evangeline promised. After they hung up, Evangeline found herself crying not from sadness, but from the complexity of what she'd become. She was bound now to Cassius across centuries, yet still tethered to her mortal family by love and obligation. She existed in two worlds, belonging fully to neither, forever walking the margin between light and darkness. Cassius held her as she wept, and through the bond, she felt something from him that had never touched her before. Regret, not for taking her, not for binding her, but for the inevitable loss that loving a mortal, even one transformed into a consort, would eventually bring. "What happens when I age?" she asked suddenly. "You won't," he said. "The consort's blood is different. You'll mature to the peak of your beauty and strength, and then you'll simply stay there, unchanged, eternal, just as I am." It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like another trap, another way the universe was closing off her escape routes, ensuring that she would remain bound to him, remain walking in darkness, remain forever separated from the normal arc of a mortal life. And yet, through the bond, she felt his love absolute, devastating, infinitely patient. He had waited 300 years for her. He would wait 300 more if necessary. The question was, could she stop running and simply accept what she was becoming? The masquerade ball was Cassius's idea away, he said, of reintroducing himself to the world he'd abandoned centuries ago. The venue was an abandoned cathedral on the city's outskirts, one that had been decommissioned 20 years ago and was now used for private events. It was perfect. Gothic, isolated, intimate enough for secrets, grand enough for spectacle. "You'll see what I am," Cassius told her the night before. They were in the library, and he was adjusting the cufflinks on a suit that must have cost more than her monthly salary. Not the tamed version I've become with you. The real thing. The hunger. The predator. I've already seen that, Evangeline said, adjusting her own gown, a creation of black silk and silver thread that seemed designed to catch moonlight and weaponize it. She felt beautiful and dangerous, which was exactly how she wanted to feel. The transformation had given her confidence, or perhaps it had simply revealed confidence that had always been there, waiting beneath her human mortality. You've felt it through the bond, Cassius corrected. Tonight, you'll watch it manifest. You'll see me feed. The fear fluttered through her, quickly tamped down by the certainty through their connection. He would never harm her. But others? Who? She asked. Volunteers, he said. Members of an underground society that exists specifically for this purpose. They call themselves the hemophiles. They seek out vampires, cultivate relationships with them, and eventually offer their blood as a kind of sacrament. It's a fantasy for them, mostly harmless to us, far better than hunting, far cleaner than the mess of actual predation. How do you know about them? I've been watching this city for 4 years, Cassius said. Long before you arrived, observing from the crypt, preparing the house, waiting. I've made contacts. I've arranged things. I've been planning this reunion with the world for longer than I care to admit. The cathedral was transformed when they arrived. Candlelight, somehow. Always candlelight with Cassius illuminated the vaulted ceiling, casting everything in shades of gold and shadow. The pews had been removed, and the floor had been decorated with elaborate patterns drawn in what Evangeline realized with a start was silver paint, arranged in binding runes and protective circles. Wards, Cassius explained, seeing her recognition. To prevent accidental transformation, to keep the feeding contained, to protect the volunteers. There were perhaps 30 people there, all dressed in finery that ranged from Victorian to modern haute couture. Some wore masks that obscured their faces. Others left themselves visible, and Evangeline could see the hunger in their eyes, hunger for the forbidden, for the dangerous, for something that would make their normal lives feel less like slow death. Cassius moved through the crowd like a ghost made solid, and Evangeline followed, feeling him through the bond. His presence was different here, in the open, in the presence of so many mortal hearts beating their mortal rhythms. He was less controlled, more essential, more purely vampire. She could feel his hunger as if it were her own, a constant, gnawing ache that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the smell of blood, the proximity of living flesh, the promise of that exquisite moment when sustenance and pleasure merged into one overwhelming sensation. A woman approached him, blonde, ethereal, with the kind of beauty that marked her as someone who'd offered her blood before. She wore a low-cut dress that exposed her throat, and Evangeline felt a spike of possessiveness through their bond. But Cassius simply smiled and took her hand. Not tonight, he said gently. Tonight I'm spoken for. The woman looked disappointed but accepting. She drifted away, and Evangeline understood. In this underground society, there were rituals, protocols, understandings about who fed from whom. They moved to a private chamber what had once been the cathedral's sacristy, now converted into something intimate and carefully prepared. Inside, a single figure waited, a young man, perhaps 25, with dark skin and the kind of nervous excitement that came from First Communion. "Your Highness," the young man said, and there was reverence in his tone. Cassius's expression shifted into something that was both more and less human, the predator, recognizing a willing prey, the prince acknowledging a subject. "You understand what you're offering?" Cassius asked. "Yes, sir, I understand. I need this." Cassius moved with fluid grace, and suddenly they were close, the young man's exposed neck an invitation. Evangeline watched from her position by the door, feeling the surge of hunger through the bond, feeling the moment when Cassius's fangs descended, feeling the terrible, sacred moment when predator and prey came together in their ancient ritual. The young man gasped as Cassius bit him, and the sound was part pleasure, part pain, part transcendence. His hands gripped Cassius's shoulders, holding on as if he might drown, and Cassius fed, his body language shifting into something that was almost bestial, utterly inhuman, consuming not just blood but the vitality itself, the life force that kept the young man alive. Through the bond, Evangeline felt it. The ecstasy of feeding after so long without, the rush of human warmth mixing with ancient hunger, the terrible joy of being fully, completely what nature had made him. And beneath it all, the discipline of a prince who understood his own limits, who knew exactly how much he could take before the feeding became murder. When he released the young man, it was gently. The young man collapsed backward, gasping, his eyes glazed with pleasure and shock. Cassius steadied him, guided him to a chair, placed a cloth against the bite wounds that were already beginning to close. "Rest," Cassius said softly. "You've done well. You'll feel weaker for a few days, but the connection we've formed will actually accelerate your healing. By tomorrow, the wounds will be barely visible. By next week, they'll be gone entirely." Only then did Cassius turn to look at Evangeline. His eyes were fully silver now, no brown at all, and his fangs were still extended. Blood darkened his lips. He was magnificent and monstrous, everything the mortal world feared and desired in equal measure. "Now," he said, "it's your turn." Evangeline felt fear spike through her, but it was mingled with curiosity, with hunger of her own. They moved to him together, and he tilted his head, exposing his throat. She could feel the urge through the bond, the need to feed, to take him the way she had before, though this time in public, in front of witnesses, with the formality of a ritual. But she also felt something else. Knowledge that she was different from him. The hunger she felt wasn't the predatory hunger of a vampire for prey. It was the hunger of a consort for her bound, intimate, specific, entirely focused on this one person. She bit him gently, and his blood flowed into her not with the chaotic intensity of before, but with the sweetness of ritual, of practice, of two beings who had learned each other's rhythms. She drank, and through the bond, she felt his pleasure at being fed from, his joy at her claiming him, his absolute certainty that this was right, that she was right, that the 300 years of waiting had led to this single perfect moment. When she released him, she tasted salt tears, she realized, tears running down his ancient face. "I love you," he whispered. "God help me. I love you, and I will break before I let you go." The attack came 3 days after the masquerade ball. They were in the library when Evangeline felt it, a wrongness in the air, a vibration that made her newly immortal bones ache. Through the bond, she felt Cassius's awareness of it too, his sudden surge of protective fury. "Hunters," he said, rising from the chair where he'd been reading. "They've found us." Before she could ask how, the windows exploded inward, not from impact from the inside, the glass bursting outward, as if something had been pressing against it from within. Evangeline had a single moment of confusion before she understood. They hadn't been outside. They'd been waiting in a circle around the house, holding wards in place, and now those wards were collapsing, reality reasserting itself, the hidden becoming visible. There were 6 of them. They wore the regalia of the old Inquisition leather armor adorned with holy symbols, weapons that gleamed with silver and iron, crosses that seemed to burn with their own light. Their faces were hidden behind ornate masks, but Evangeline could feel the hunger in them, not for blood, but for righteousness, for the satisfaction of a hunt well executed. "Cassius of Ashmark," one of them called, their voice distorted by the mask. "You are hereby summoned to trial by the Council of Eternal Guardians. Surrender yourself for judgment, and we will spare the human." "She's not human," Cassius said calmly, stepping in front of Evangeline. "And I do not acknowledge your authority. You exist in our world," another hunter said. "You feed in our cities. You corrupt our people. You will answer for these crimes." Evangeline felt Cassius prepare to fight, felt the ancient warrior beneath the gentleman rising to meet this challenge. But something in her rebelled against that. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the shock of it through the bond. "I'll talk to them," she said. "Evangeline, I'm a consort," she said. "I'm bound to you, but I'm not property. I can speak for us." She stepped forward, past Cassius, and faced the hunters. "I'm not corrupted," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm transformed, by choice. I took his blood knowing what it would do to me. I chose this." "You were marked," one hunter said. "The mark took away your free will." "Did it?" Evangeline said. "Then explain why I called my mother after the marking. Why I'm making my own decisions. Why I'm standing here, speaking for myself. rather than hiding behind the one who turned me. There was a moment of silence. Then the leader of the hunters spoke. The council will judge this. You both come with us to the sanctum. There, you will undergo trial. If your claims of consent are true, you may both be freed. If not, the hunter paused. If not, the vampire will be destroyed, and the consort will be contained for observation. Contained how? Cassius asked quietly. Evangeline could feel his rage through the bond and his restraint. In sunlight, the hunter said, to see if you can withstand it. If you can, you may eventually regain your mortality. If not, you'll understand that your transformation was a curse, not a gift. Evangeline had heard about this through the knowledge Cassius had shared the Guardian's most terrible punishment. Vampires and consorts, locked in sealed chambers filled with artificial sunlight, unable to escape, unable to feed, slowly dissolving as the light burned away their supernatural nature. But she also felt something else through the bond. Cassius's acceptance of the risk. We'll go, she said. Both of us, without resistance. No, Cassius said fiercely, gripping her hand. They'll destroy me, and you'll die in sunlight. We run. There are ways. There aren't, Evangeline said. She could feel the truth of it through their connection. They were bound now, and where one went, the other would always follow. Separation would slowly kill them both. We face this together, and we tell the truth. We let the universe decide what we are. The sanctum was hidden beneath the city, beneath even the hospital, in caverns that predated modern civilization. The hunters transported them through tunnels carved from living stone, past inscriptions in languages that Evangeline couldn't read but could somehow understand through her shared memories with Cassius. The wards grew thicker as they descended, protective magic layered upon protective magic, designed to contain the darkest things. The trial chamber was a vast, circular room carved with runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. At its center was a throne empty, waiting. The hunters directed them to stand in the middle of the floor, surrounded by a circle of binding runes that made Evangeline's skin itch. Slowly, figures emerged from the shadows. There were 13 of them, robed in white, their faces hidden behind silver masks, shaped like human skulls. The Council of Eternal Guardians. They moved with the weight of centuries, the slow ceremony of ritual, the absolute certainty of those who believed they were instruments of divine will. The one who occupied the throne was older than the others. Evangeline could feel it, could sense the weight of centuries pressing against her from its position. When it spoke, its voice was barely a whisper, yet it filled the entire chamber. We have watched you for 3 days, Prince Cassius. We have monitored your feeding, your covenant, your reintegration into mortal society. We have observed the consort, Evangeline Chen, and measured her transformation. We have come to understand that this trial may not be what we initially believed. A pause, heavy with significance. The prophecy, the council member continued, spoke of a consort who would break the cycle of damnation, a soul so pure, so willing, so freely given, that she would transform the curse into something else entirely. The witch who created your covenant 300 years ago was one of our order. She foresaw this moment. Cassius tensed beside Evangeline. Through the bond, she felt his shock, his dawning comprehension. You sent her to me, he said. The witch. You were testing me. We were, the council member confirmed. And you failed that test, Prince Cassius. You accepted the covenant for love of a mortal woman, without consent, driven by arrogance and desperation. But now, 3 centuries later, you are being offered redemption through a soul who chooses you freely, who accepts the blood bonding willingly, who transforms herself not through your curse, but through her own agency. The council member rose from the throne. Evangeline Chen, we ask you now, do you stand before us in bondage, or do you stand before us as a consort in full possession of your will? Evangeline felt the weight of that question. Through the bond, she felt Cassius's fear that she would say she was enslaved, that she would reject him, that she would choose the mercy of a quick ending over the eternity of binding. But she'd had weeks to think about this. She'd had nights to walk through the memories of what she was becoming, to understand both the beauty and the horror of her transformation. I stand before you as a consort in full possession of my will, she said, her voice ringing clearly through the chamber. I came to the crypt of my own volition. I accepted the mark of my own volition. I took his blood of my own volition. And I would do all of these things again, knowing exactly what they mean, knowing the cost, knowing that I will walk in darkness for the rest of eternity. I choose him. I choose this. I choose us. For a long moment, the council members were silent. Then, as one, they reached up and removed their silver masks. Beneath, Evangeline saw not the ancient hunters she expected, but faces that shifted in the candlelight, sometimes human, sometimes something other, sometimes both at once. The council members were not pure humans. They were themselves transformed, themselves bound, themselves caught between worlds. Then the trial is over, the eldest said. You are free to go. The binding you have created is sealed, not by dark covenant, but by the most powerful magic in existence, freely given consent. You may walk in sunlight if you choose, though it will pain you. You may create others like yourselves, if you are careful. You may live in this world, so long as you do not corrupt it. The bonds released Evangeline's feet, and she felt Cassius take her hand. There is one more thing, the council member said. The prophecy spoke of breaking the cycle. It did not specify how. The witch believed you would transform the curse entirely, that you would find a way to remove the mark, to free yourself and Prince Cassius of the covenant. But perhaps the prophecy meant something else. Perhaps it meant that you would transform damnation into something sacred. That you would prove that love and choice can elevate even darkness into something holy. The council members bowed not to Cassius, but to Evangeline. Go now, they said. Live, and know that you have our blessing. The journey back to the house was silent. It wasn't until they were behind closed doors, in the sanctuary of the library, that Cassius allowed his emotions to surface. He collapsed onto one of the high-backed chairs, his ancient face crumpling, and he wept, not the controlled tears of a prince, but the raw, broken sobs of someone who had finally, after 300 years, been freed from the weight of condemnation. Evangeline knelt before him and held him, and through the bond, she felt something shift. The mark on her skin glowed faintly, and she understood. The covenant was changing. Not breaking, but transforming. Just as the council member had predicted. The damnation was becoming sacred. The curse was becoming a gift. 3 months after the trial, Evangeline woke to find Cassius already gone. This wasn't unusual. He often spent his daylight hours in a specially constructed chamber beneath the house, reading or meditating or simply existing in the darkness that felt more natural to him than any light ever could. But through the bond, she felt something different. Urgency, purpose, a directed intention that felt almost like fear. She found him in the cellar, standing before an ancient door she'd never noticed before. It was carved from wood that looked older than the house, older perhaps than the city itself, and it was sealed with chains and locks and symbols that made her eyes water when she tried to focus on them. What is this? She asked. The place where it began, Cassius said quietly. Where I created the covenant. Where the witch performed the ritual 300 years ago. It's been sealed ever since, locked away, too dangerous to open. Why are you opening it now? Because the council spoke of transformation, Cassius said. Because the prophecy isn't complete. Because I think, with you beside me, with your willing blood and your free choice, I might finally be able to undo what I did to myself. He reached out, and the chains fell away as if they'd been made of silk. The locks opened. The door swung inward, revealing a passage that descended into darkness even her immortal eyes couldn't quite penetrate. They went down. The tunnel was carved from living stone, and the walls were covered in symbols, not the protective wards of the guardians, but something older, darker, more primal. This was the language of the original covenant, the words spoken when the world was younger, and magic was written directly into reality. At the bottom, they entered a chamber. It was vast, far larger than the physical space above should have allowed. The ceiling was lost in darkness, and the walls seemed to shimmer, as if they existed partially outside normal space. At the center of the chamber, a circle was drawn in what looked like silver, but felt like crystallized magic. This is where my wife lay, Cassius said. Where I performed the ritual. Where the witch spoke the words that bound my soul to eternity. Evangeline felt the weight of the space, The accumulated sorrow, the layers of grief and guilt that had accumulated here over 3 centuries. Through the bond, she felt Cassius's regret, his shame, his desperate need to make this right. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Stand with me in the circle," he said. "Let me speak the words again, but this time, speak them with me. Let your consent bind them, rather than my desperation. Let's see if we can rewrite the covenant." They moved to the center of the circle together. The moment they crossed the boundary, the space came alive. The symbols on the walls began to glow, not with the cold light of the Guardian's wards, but with the warm, deep light of something alive, something hungry, something that had been waiting 300 years for this moment. "I take thee as my eternal companion," Cassius began, and the words came from somewhere deeper than his throat, from the place where his soul had been rewritten by the original covenant. "I bind thy blood to mine, thy fate to mine, thy eternity to mine, and in exchange, I offer not damnation, but transformation, not curse, but covenant, not the darkness of isolation, but the light of connection." Evangeline heard the words and understood them with a knowledge that came from somewhere beyond memory. She opened her mouth, and her voice joined his, and the words that emerged were ancient and perfect and true. "I accept this binding. I accept this transformation. I accept thy eternity, and give freely in return. Let the covenant that was made in desperation be remade in love. Let the curse that bound thee in isolation bind us instead in unity, and may all that was broken be made whole." The circle erupted with light. It wasn't painful, it was the opposite of pain. The sensation of becoming, of being unmade and remade simultaneously, of cells and soul both being rewritten at the fundamental level. Evangeline felt herself dissolving into light, felt Cassius dissolving beside her, felt the two of them merging in a way that was both deeply intimate and utterly transcendent. "I love you," she felt him say, not in words but in pure emotion flowing through the bond. "I know," she responded. "I've always known." When the light faded, they were still standing in the circle, but everything had changed. Evangeline could see the new marks on her skin. They were like Cassius's marks, but different, complementary, as if his thorns and crowns had intertwined with symbols of her own creation, hers and his becoming one unified language. And through the bond, she felt something that hadn't been there before. Not the pull of obligation or the hunger of the vampire, but pure, crystalline love, untainted by desperation or curse. "Did it work?" she asked. "I don't know," Cassius said, and she felt his wonder through the bond. "I feel different, lighter. The weight of the original covenant, the terrible weight of it, it's gone. I don't feel damned anymore, Evangeline. For the first time in 300 years, I feel like I might deserve to be loved." They left the chamber hand in hand, not running but moving with quiet certainty. The tunnel sealed itself behind them, the chains and locks reforming, the door closing as if it had never been opened. When they emerged into the house, it was dawn. Cassius moved toward the windows, and Evangeline felt his hesitation through the bond. The early morning light was streaming through the glass, golden and promising. "Try," she said. He reached out, and his hand crossed the threshold into sunlight. The moment his skin touched the light, it burned. Not with the consuming fire that would have destroyed him weeks ago, but with a sensation like healing wounds finally being exposed to air. He gasped, and she felt his surprise, his joy, his absolute wonder. "I can bear it," he said. "It hurts, but I can bear it. I can walk in the daylight." Evangeline watched as he stepped fully into the morning sun, watched as the light played across his skin, watched as the marks on his body seemed to glow with an internal radiance. He was still pale, still marked, still utterly inhuman, but he was no longer burning. The curse had transformed into something else entirely. "Come," he said, extending his hand. "Let's walk through the world together. Daylight and darkness both. We'll walk it together." The spring garden was something Cassius had maintained for longer than Evangeline could comprehend. Hidden behind the Victorian mansion, surrounded by ancient stone walls that predated the house itself, it was a place that seemed to exist outside of time. The flowers that bloomed there were impossible roses that smelled like sin and redemption. lilies that glowed faintly in the darkness, jasmine vines that seemed to hum with their own internal music. It was here, on a night when the moon was new and the stars were particularly bright, that Cassius knelt before her. In his hand was a ring, not gold or silver, but something that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight, set with a stone that was simultaneously clear as diamond and dark as the night sky. The band was inscribed with the symbols of their binding, their marks rendered in a language that seemed to speak directly to her soul. "I have lived 300 years," Cassius said, his voice carrying the weight of all those centuries, waiting for the moment when love would no longer feel like damnation, waiting for a soul brave enough to stand beside me in darkness, to choose me, to transform me from cursed prince into something worthy of existence. Evangeline, you are that soul. You are my redemption, my beloved, my eternal companion in all things. Will you marry me? Not in the eyes of God I forfeited that blessing 3 centuries ago, but in the eyes of the universe itself? Will you bind yourself to me in every way, forever? Evangeline felt tears on her cheeks as she said the word that would change everything again. Yes. The wedding ceremony took place in the abandoned cathedral where they'd attended the masquerade ball. But this time, the space had been transformed by magic. Cassius's magic, she understood now. Magic that he'd been too afraid to use before the remaking of the covenant, but that he could wield now without fear of it consuming him. The walls bloomed with roses. The floor became a mirror reflecting the night sky. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility, and the guests there were those she hadn't expected. Her mother, looking bewildered and brave, her hand held by the woman who'd been her therapist for 5 years, a woman who, Evangeline understood now, had always known something extraordinary about her daughter. There were members of the hemophile community who'd offered their blood to Cassius in the early days. There were the council members, their masks off, their ancient faces visible to all. And there were others, people and things that existed in the margins of the world, beings that most humans would never see or understand, but that had always known where to find those like them. The ceremony was brief, but it felt eternal. Cassius took her hand, and the marks on their bodies illuminated, creating a light that filled the entire cathedral. Evangeline felt the final pieces of the covenant slide into place not as an obligation, but as a choice renewed, again and again, in every moment, in every heartbeat. "I bind myself to thee," Cassius said. "Not in darkness, but in light. Not in isolation, but in unity. I take thee as my wife, my beloved, my eternal mirror. May our love transcend the boundaries of mortality and curse, and may we find in each other the redemption that neither of us could find alone. I bind myself to thee," Evangeline responded, her voice steady and clear. "With knowledge of what we are, and acceptance of what we might become. I take thee as my husband, my companion in eternity, my chosen path through both darkness and light. May our love transform what was broken, and may we never walk alone again." When they kissed, it felt like the world realigned itself. The marks on their bodies burned with light, and Evangeline felt something shift in the very fabric of the universe, a debt paid, a prophecy fulfilled, a cycle broken and remade into something sacred. Later, after the guests had departed, and the cathedral had returned to its ordinary state of beautiful ruin, they stood together on the rooftop of the mansion, watching the city spread out beneath them like a circuit board of light and shadow. "We could leave," Cassius said quietly. "Now that the covenant is remade, we're not bound to this city. We could go anywhere. Europe, Asia, places where we could build a new life, where no one would know what we were." "Do you want to?" Evangeline asked. "No," Cassius said, and she felt the truth of it through the bond. "This city is where you found me. This is where we were reborn together. I want to stay here, and I want to watch what we build together in this place. I want to see how our love transforms not just us, but perhaps those around us." "There will be others," Evangeline said. It wasn't a question. Through the bond, she could feel the shapes of potential futures, the ways that consorts and vampires might find each other, the way their love story might become a template for redemption rather than damnation. "Yes," Cassius confirmed, "there will be others, but they will choose their own path, just as you chose yours. We cannot force transformation. We can only offer it." And some will refuse, some will run, some will come back, changed and broken by the attempt. But some, like you, will find that the darkness, when shared with another soul, becomes something entirely new. They'll find that transformation isn't a curse at all. It's the greatest gift the universe can offer. Evangeline took his hand and felt the familiar warmth of their connection, the marks on their bodies singing in harmony. The moon rose above the city, silver and eternal, and she understood that they would see 10,000 moons rise and set, that they had forever to walk this path together, that the covenant that had begun in desperation 300 years ago had finally become something pure. "I love you," she said. "I know," Cassius replied, and his smile held 3 centuries of sorrow, finally transformed into joy. "And I love you. In every lifetime, in every world, in every possible configuration of reality, I love you." The letter came 6 months after the wedding, delivered by a courier who refused to meet their eyes. The consort stands at the convergence of worlds. The vampire prince thinks his redemption is complete, but prophecies are not simple things, and some endings are not endings at all. Your second transformation awaits. A choice will be presented that will determine not just your fate, but the fate of all creatures that walk in darkness. Prepare yourselves. The message was unsigned, but Evangeline didn't need a signature. She could feel the weight of it, older than the council, older than the witch who'd made the original covenant, something that predated civilization itself. "It's starting," Cassius said, and there was resignation in his voice, ancient and sad. The prophecy warned of this. Your transformation as consort is only the first stage. There will be another choice, another sacrifice, another moment where you must decide what you're willing to pay for love. "What does it mean?" Evangeline asked. "A second transformation?" "I don't know," Cassius admitted, "but I know that if the prophecy is true, it will involve something I cannot protect you from. It will require you to sacrifice something precious. And I'm terrified that when the moment comes, you'll finally understand the true cost of loving me, and you'll hate me for it." The answer came 3 weeks later, and it came in the form of blood. Evangeline woke to find herself bleeding, but not from a wound. The bleeding came from within, from her very essence, manifesting as crimson light that seemed to flow through her veins without harming her. Through the bond, she felt Cassius's shock, his horror, his dawning comprehension. "You're becoming," he whispered. "Not dying, not transforming into a vampire, you're becoming something entirely new. A true bridge between worlds. A being that can exist fully in both light and darkness." The change took weeks. Her body didn't hurt, but it was constantly aware of itself in a way that felt like hovering on the edge of transformation. The marks on her skin changed, becoming both more and less visible to human eyes. They would fade to nearly nothing, but to any creature of the night, they would blaze like a beacon. Her heartbeat slowed further, until it matched Cassius's rhythm perfectly. The two of them breathing together, beating together, becoming more unified with each passing day. And the visions came. She saw the future branching out before her, in infinite pathways. In some, she remained with Cassius forever, eternal and unchanging, watching the world evolve around them. In others, she made different choices, followed different paths, found redemption in solitude rather than in union. In still others, she and Cassius became something that frightened even her, powerful enough to reshape reality, dangerous enough to threaten the very foundations of the magical world. And in all of them, she saw the choice waiting for her at the end of the transformation. "What is the choice?" she asked Cassius one night, when the visions were particularly intense. "I believe," Cassius said carefully, "that you're being offered the chance to truly transform me. Not through covenant, but through blood magic more ancient than I can imagine. I believe you'll be given the option to make me human again, to strip away the vampire, to return me to the mortality I lost 3 centuries ago, to give me the chance to live and die as mortals do, to find peace in ending rather than in eternal continuation." Evangeline felt the weight of that. To undo 300 years of immortality, to allow the man she loved to age, to weaken, to eventually leave her, to trade eternity for a few brief decades of a normal life. "Would you want that?" she asked. "Would you choose humanity if I offered it?" "No," Cassius said immediately, and she felt the absolute truth of it through the bond. I made my choice 300 years ago, and I've been paying for it ever since. But the universe might not be asking what I want. It might be asking what you're willing to sacrifice. It might be testing whether your love is strong enough to let me go, even if going means ceasing to exist in the way I exist now. The final transformation completed on the autumn equinox, when day and night were perfectly balanced. Evangeline stood in the garden, the impossible garden, with its roses that bloomed out of season and jasmine vines that hummed with power, and she felt it. The choice, suddenly and completely present, weighing on her like the gravity of the universe itself. A figure emerged from the shadows, not human, not quite vampire, something that existed in the spaces between. "Evangeline Chen," the figure said, and its voice seemed to contain multitudes, as if 1,000 ancient things were speaking through it simultaneously. "You stand now at the threshold of true transcendence. You have been given everything: immortality, power, love, transformation. And now, at last, we ask, what will you give in return?" "What do you want?" Evangeline asked, though she already knew. "We want you to choose," the figure said. "Choose whether your beloved prince will continue as he has been, eternal, unchanging, forever separated from the mortal realm, or choose to give him the gift of mortality. Unbind him from the covenant. Return him to the world of the living. Let him die, Evangeline. Let him have the ending that the curse stole from him. That is the price of true redemption. Not for him, but for you." Evangeline felt Cassius through the bond, felt his resignation, his strange peace with whatever choice she would make. He would accept mortality if she demanded it. He would accept eternity if she chose it. His love for her was complete enough to encompass either outcome, and in that moment, she understood what true power meant. It meant having the ability to reshape reality, and choosing instead to accept it as it was. It meant having the option to undo 300 years of suffering, and choosing to honor those centuries as sacred and essential to who Cassius had become. "I choose neither," Evangeline said, and she felt the truth of the words as she spoke them. "I choose the path that already exists. He is vampire, and I am consort, and together we are something that transcends both categories. The curse is redeemed not by being undone, but by being transformed, and that transformation is already complete. I don't need to sacrifice him for him to be free. He's already free, because he chose to love me freely. That was always the answer." The figure seemed to pause, considering. Then it began to laugh, not a mocking laugh, but something that sounded like the approval of the universe itself. "Well spoken," it said. "Well chosen. You have not broken the cycle, Evangeline. You have transcended it. The prophecy is fulfilled, not as we expected, but as it always was meant to be. Go now, live, love. Transform the world not through sacrifice, but through the simple, revolutionary act of choosing each other, again and again, in every moment of forever." The figure faded. Evangeline found Cassius standing where he always stood, patient and eternal, waiting for her beneath the roses. "What did you choose?" he asked. "Us," Evangeline said simply. "I chose us. Just as I will every day for the rest of eternity." He pulled her close, and she felt his heart beating against hers, felt the marks on their bodies glowing with a light that seemed to come from within, from the place where their souls had become intertwined. Above them, the autumn sky shifted toward night, and the stars began to emerge, each one a promise of tomorrows yet to come. 5 years after the transformation, Evangeline stood in the hospital where she'd first found Cassius, not in the basement this time, but in the trauma ward where she'd worked so many lifetimes ago. She wasn't there as a nurse anymore. That chapter of her life had closed when the transformation began. Instead, she was there to observe, to watch the young trauma surgeon working the overnight shift with the same desperate intensity that she'd once brought to the work. The surgeon was fresh out of training, brilliant but burned out, moving through the hospital like someone already halfway dead. Evangeline recognized the signs she'd worn that same expression once, when she thought that holding others' pain might somehow elevate her own. Through the bond, she felt Cassius approaching through the hospital's hidden passages. He now owned the hospital, had for centuries, though no one quite understood the chain of ownership that had led to him being listed on the corporate documents. He'd always maintained it as a place of healing, a counterbalance to what he was, a way of transforming the curse of predation into the calling of salvation. "She's drowning," Cassius observed, looking at the young surgeon with the gentle sadness that he reserved for those who were suffering without yet knowing why. "Like I was," Evangeline said. "Yes, but she doesn't need a vampire to save her. She needs to understand that she can save herself, that drowning isn't the only option." "Should we?" Evangeline asked. Cassius considered. "Your mother is a therapist. She could speak to the director of the program, arrange a confidential conversation, plant a seed, let her choose whether to water it." It was how they worked now, in these 5 years of their true eternity together, not through force or supernatural intervention, but through gentle guidance, through the application of power in service of free will, through the understanding that redemption couldn't be forced upon anyone. Evangeline's mother had become integral to their operation. She'd discovered the truth about what her daughter had become, and instead of fear, she'd chosen to help. She'd become a bridge between the mortal world and the world of night, using her skills as a therapist to help others find meaning in the spaces between normal existence. The phone call to the young surgeon happened 2 days later. It led to a conversation. The conversation led to a leave of absence. The leave of absence led, eventually, to the surgeon finding a different path, not saved by anything supernatural, but saved by the simple act of choosing to believe that another way forward was possible. This, Evangeline had learned, was how change happened in the world, not through dramatic transformations or magical intervention, but through countless small moments of connection, through patience and love applied across lifetimes. The years accumulated. 10 years after the transformation, they'd established a network of safe houses across the country, places where consorts and vampires could find refuge, where those who'd been transformed against their will could learn to live with what they'd become, where those considering the transformation could make informed choices. 20 years after the transformation, Evangeline had written a book published under a pseudonym that explored the mythology of vampires and redefined them not as monsters but as beings caught between states, capable of transcendence, but easily drawn toward damnation without proper support and community. 30 years after the transformation, they'd begun training others not to hunt vampires, but to understand them, to bridge the gap between the mortal world and the world of night, to create a new kind of council that worked for cooperation rather than containment. 50 years after the transformation, Evangeline found herself returning to the hospital one night, moving through the same hallways that had once felt like a prison and now felt like a garden of possibilities. She was no longer young in appearance, but not old either. Cassius's blood had stabilized her at an age somewhere between 30 and 40, and the consort's power had allowed her to adjust her appearance slightly, not so much that she could change who she fundamentally was, but enough that she could pass through the world without drawing attention to her unchanging nature. Cassius was waiting for her in the crypt, the place where they'd first touched, where the covenant had first begun to form. The hospital had built around it, but it had never attempted to develop it. It remained sealed, preserved, a monument to their beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Cassius asked. He asked this sometimes, in quiet moments, as if part of him still couldn't quite believe that someone would willingly choose to remain by his side. "Never," Evangeline said, and she meant it completely. "And you?" "Never," he echoed. "Though sometimes I wish I could tell you what it was like, before. When I was human. When I could feel the sun on my skin without it burning. When I could eat food and taste it the way mortals do. When I didn't know that love could be so complicated, so beautiful, so utterly consuming. You can taste the world through me," Evangeline said. She'd learned this over the years, the way that the bond allowed them to share sensations, to experience reality through each other's perceptions. When Cassius fed from her, he experienced not just the taste of blood, but her consciousness, her memories, her way of perceiving the world. They could be more truly together than any pair of humans could ever be. "I know," Cassius said, "and it's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything." He took her hand, and they stood together in the crypt, in the place where it had all begun. Around them, the ancient stone walls seemed to pulse with their own quiet heartbeat, a rhythm that matched the pulse of the bond between them. "What do you think will happen?" Evangeline asked. "When centuries pass, when the world changes in ways we can't imagine, when we've seen everything there is to see, Loved through everything there is to love through? Then we'll find something new, Cassius said. Because you, my beloved, are infinitely new to me. Every day I discover something I hadn't known about you. Every moment, you surprise me. And I will never, in all eternity, grow tired of that discovery. He kissed her, and even after 50 years of union, it felt like the first kiss. Felt like discovery. Felt like coming home to a place she'd never left, but was always arriving at for the first time. Come, he said, pulling her toward the passage that led to the house. We have a letter from the council. There's a newly transformed consort in need of guidance, and I think your particular skill with the traumatized might be valuable. As they walked through the darkness together, no light needed between them. The bond itself providing illumination, Evangeline reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd been a nurse. Once, she'd held people's hands as they died, had stood vigil at the moment when life transformed into something else. She'd thought she was meant to ease the passage from one state to another. She'd been right. But she hadn't understood then that she herself would be the one transformed, that her deepest calling would be to help others navigate transformation, to understand that being made into something new didn't have to be a curse if there was love guiding the process. As they emerged into the Victorian mansion, into the rooms that had become home, into the garden where roses bloomed eternal and the jasmine vines hummed their ancient songs, Evangeline looked at Cassius and smiled. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For waiting 300 years. For being patient enough to understand that redemption isn't something that happens to you. It's something you create through the daily choice to love, to be loved, to remain open to transformation even when you're terrified." Cassius pulled her close, and they danced together in the shadow of the garden, moving to music that only they could hear, the song of the covenant, the rhythm of the bond, the eternal melody of two souls who had finally learned that sometimes the greatest curse can become the greatest gift. If you're willing to let go of the demand for perfection and simply accept what is offered with grace. Outside, the city slept. Inside the mansion, in the garden where roses bloomed eternal, and the night held no terrors, love continued its ancient work, transforming darkness into light, curse into blessing, isolation into unity, forever. 20 years later, a new consort was being born. The young woman, her name was Isolde, and she'd been marked by one of the network's vampires, a gentle soul named Thaddeus, who'd been struggling with his own isolation for nearly 2 centuries, lay in one of the mansion's transformation chambers, her body rewriting itself, her consciousness dancing in that liminal space between human and immortal. Evangeline sat beside her, as she'd done for dozens of consorts over the past 70 years, and held her hand through the darkness. "It hurts," Isolde husped. "I know," Evangeline said. "But you're not alone. You're never alone again. That's the Covenant's first gift. Even before the power or the longevity, you're bound to another soul now, and through that binding, you'll never have to carry your pain in isolation." Cassius stood in the doorway, watching. He'd learned, over the decades, that his presence sometimes frightened those undergoing transformation. Better to let Evangeline, who understood the mortal mind better, who could remember more clearly what it was like to be human, guide them through. But he was never far. None of their chosen family were. Evangeline's mother, now 97 years old, and still sharp as a knife, sat in the parlor below, writing down Isolde's intake information. Ambrose, another ancient vampire who'd chosen to help rather than prey, monitored the magical signatures to ensure Isolde's transformation was proceeding normally. And scattered through the network across the globe were dozens of others, humans and vampires, consorts and covenant partners, all of them working together to create a world where transformation was choice rather than curse, where the night was a place of community rather than isolation. By dawn, Isolde's transformation would be complete. She would wake to find herself beautiful and powerful, and terrified. And Thaddeus would be waiting, having prepared himself for weeks to be the steady presence that would anchor her to her new reality. And the cycle would continue, not the cycle of curse and damnation that Cassius had endured, but the cycle of redemption, of souls choosing to bind themselves together, of darkness transforming into something sacred. As Evangeline guided Isolde toward sleep, toward the dreams that would populate the hours of her transformation, she felt Cassius's presence through the bond, felt his contentment, felt his gratitude that the story which had begun in despair had evolved into this. A legacy not of darkness but of light, not of isolation but of community, not of curse but of covenant freely chosen. "Sleep now," she whispered to Isolde. "When you wake, you'll be reborn, and you'll never be alone again." Later, when the young woman was sleeping and the mansion was quiet, Evangeline and Cassius stood together on the rooftop, watching the pre-dawn sky begin its transformation from black to blue to the barest hint of gold. "Do you ever regret the choice?" Cassius asked, though she'd answered this question 1,000 times now. "If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you still touch my hand in that crypt?" "Every single time," Evangeline said, and she meant it with the absolute certainty of 7 decades of love. "You've shown me things I never would have seen. You've taught me that transformation isn't destruction, it's the universe offering us a chance to become more than we were. You've shown me that curse and blessing are sometimes the same thing, viewed from different angles." She took his hand, and even after 70 years, the touch felt like coming home, like discovery, like the most essential thing in existence. "And you?" she asked. "Still no regrets?" "Only one," Cassius said, and she felt a flutter of concern through the bond. "Sometimes I regret that it took 300 years for you to exist, that I had to suffer so long before you arrived. But then I remember that perhaps those 300 years of suffering were necessary. Perhaps they refined me, made me worthy of you, gave me the understanding I needed to guide others through similar darkness." He pulled her close as the sun began to rise. As the light started to burn against his skin, a pain he'd learned to accept, to even cherish, because it was the price of living in her world. "We did it," Evangeline said, watching the city wake below them, watching the world that they'd helped to change through patience and love, and the simple revolutionary act of choosing each other, over and over again, for 70 years and counting. "We did," Cassius agreed, "and we'll keep doing it, for as long as eternity lasts, for as long as there are souls caught between darkness and light, we'll be here to show them that both can be sacred. That transformation doesn't have to be the end of everything, that the greatest curse can become the greatest gift." The sun rose over the city, and the vampire prince and his consort stood together in its light, burning slightly, healed slightly, transformed slightly, and yet, in all the ways that mattered, completely and utterly complete. This was their ending. Or perhaps, more accurately, it was their beginning, a beginning that would continue for all eternity, reborn in each moment, sacred and eternal, and entirely, impossibly theirs.